All right, so we will get started. It is Thursday, December 18th. We are ready for the last EBFA webinar of 2014. Very special welcome to everybody who's tuning in live. I always greatly appreciate people who can tune in live and taking that time out of their schedule. So thank you, everyone. If you are listening to the archive version, thank you as well. And we always appreciate the support for EBFA webinars. So the way that it goes down, as with all webinars, is they are all recorded, archived, and can be found on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/EBFA Fitness. We'll go through the webinar, which will take probably 30 minutes, and then we will save some time at the end for questions. So on the control panel, you should see an area that you can type in some questions. So as they come up throughout the webinar, you can type that at any time and know that we will go through those at the end. I do like to provide the PowerPoint for those who are interested. So if you are interested, please do not hesitate to email me at education@EBFA Fitness, and I would gladly send it to you if you want to share it with some of your colleagues, or review it again. So for those who are not familiar with who I am, my name is Dr. Emily Splichal. I am a podiatrist, movement specialist in New York City, and I'm also the founder of EBFA Fitness. I have a very special passion for barefoot training, barefoot science, footwear innovations. So it's perfect segue into tonight's webinar, which is all about understanding impact forces and what is called the catapult effect. A lot of the concepts that I'm going to be going into tonight are some of the updates and additions that we're adding into 2015 EBFA education. So if you have taken any workshop or certification through EBFA, know that there is some new exciting content in our courses. We do have the various levels. So if you are looking to keep challenging yourself, there is always a challenge. So we are getting started. Why is this an important topic? I think that there's a great misunderstanding about footwear, impact forces, this concept of overuse injuries. Why do we get injured if we run in a certain strike pattern? Is cushion good? Is cushion bad? A lot of the stuff that was taught through podiatry is very different from the way that I actually look at my patients now and the recommendations that I make. I very much came through the thought process, or I was taught that cushion is good. We recommend a specific brand, which I won't mention because I do not endorse that brand, to all of our patients. And you become almost like a little monkey just repeating the exact same thing when it's been repeated for years and people are still getting injured. So it probably isn't really working. So I like to challenge this concept of overuse injuries, impact forces. Are impact forces bad? Should cushion be in shoes, etc.? So some of the questions that we're going to ask throughout this webinar, and that I like to ask throughout all of my courses and blogs, is one, how do we perceive impact forces? How does our body even know the degree of impact forces that are coming in? And how is our perception of impact forces affected by footwear, surfaces, socks, mat density, etc.? Second question that we're going to ask is, how does our body damp or absorb these impact forces? Then we're going to move on to how footwear surfaces and fatigue, specifically fatigue, impair our ability to damp the impact forces. So not necessarily perception, but damping of these impact forces. How does our body use the impact forces? And are impact forces bad? Are they good? How can we change our relationship with impact forces? And yes, finally, how can we improve our relationship with impact forces? So we're going to get started. Impact forces, some of the statistics or facts related to impact forces. We're probably familiar that with a walking gait, we encounter 1 to 1.5 times our body weight in impact forces. You pick up the pace and you start to go into a 3 to 4 times body weight in impact forces. That is regardless of strike pattern. So whether you're doing a heel strike or a midfoot strike, you still have 3 to 4 times body weight in impact forces. You increase it to a jumping or a high velocity type landing, and now you're going up to 9 to 10 times body weight in impact forces. We look specifically at walking. That peak impact is happening within less than 50 milliseconds. We're going to revisit that statistic again, or that fact. And then the impact frequency is around 15 to 20 hertz. And again, we're going to revisit it, why it's important to know that impact frequency is around that 15 to 20 hertz. So how do we perceive impact forces? Well, we perceive impact forces, and many times people are surprised that our perception of impact forces is through vibrations. So that's where that frequency fact came in handy, that 15 to 20 hertz. That was a vibration frequency. Now, our receptors to this frequency, and the first receptor that is encountering the ground is in the skin in the bottom of the foot. So it's a very specific Pacinian corpuscle. This one is very specific to vibration, and it is found again on the skin in the bottom of the foot. Not hairy skin like the other parts of the body, but very specific to the plantar as well as palmar skin on our hands and on our feet. So what happens is that if you wear shoes and you block that receptor, then you start to have an altered perception of the vibrations that are coming in. Cushion in the shoes starts to skew your perception of the vibrations coming in. And again, we're going to keep visiting this. What's interesting is that 80% of your plantar receptors are sensitive to vibration. That means that if you had to choose one input that's coming in, it better be vibration. That vibration is actually going to help you to detect the compliancy of the surface. Your ability to detect compliancy, or like softness, hardness of a surface, helps you stabilize your body, and it's very critical to the way that you maintain upright stance and locomotion. So very important for that. As far as aging goes, our plantar receptor density actually decreases as we age. It's actually kind of scary, the statistics on that, as far as how much the density decreases. Trying to recall offhand that it's around 64 squared millimeters is the density when you're in your 20s, and then by the time you're 80, it is like 8 squared millimeters, that's like 8-fold times is less dense, that's pretty quite impressive. And that concept, as far as fall risk, baby boomers, that's another area that I'm very passionate about. Sensitivity threshold increases, obviously that's related to that shift in density. So keeping our plantar receptors young and stimulated is very important as we age. So how do we damp the vibrations? So we know that they're coming in. That's the impact forces coming in. It's 15 to 20 hertz. How do we damp these vibrations? Well, there's a theory that's called muscle tuning theory. And this is introduced and talked a lot by one of my favorite researchers, Dr. Neig out of Calgary. And this muscle tuning theory, what it states is that all of our soft tissue compartments, which are all over the body, these fascial compartments, they vibrate at a set frequency. And all of these soft tissue compartments do not like to vibrate. So what they do is, as the vibrations are coming in, they try to damp it and quiet those vibrations, because it doesn't like to be irritated with those vibrations. The way that it does that damping of the vibrations is through isometric contractions. So there's a lot of research showing that we actually damp the vibrations through isometric contractions, which is different than us thinking of us loading through eccentric contractions. So we're typically taught deceleration phase, eccentric contractions. That's typically how I teach it initially in my courses. But what's interesting is that it's actually an isometric contraction, and there's EMG studies showing this. And why it's an isometric contraction is because it allows that elastic potential energy to then go into our fascia and our tendons, because that's where that recoil sits, is in the connective tissue, the fascia and the tendons. So we damp through isometrics. Now, what happens is if you cannot contract isometrically fast enough, these vibrations then start to go into your tendons and into your bones. So that's where we start to see classically an Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, stress fractures. So we need to be one step ahead of these vibrations that are coming in so that you can get your peak muscle contraction in time to damp those vibrations fast enough. And that's really how I look at my patients now. It's completely different than just impact is bad, it's the shoes, you don't have enough cushion in the shoes, etc. So, which muscles are specifically contracting? So the muscles that are contracting, this is again through Dr. Nigg's research and this muscle tuning theory, is that it is the fast twitch fibers. And it makes sense because the peak contraction the peak contraction happens within 23 to 73 milliseconds in a fast twitch muscle fiber. So the more dense and the faster that you can accelerate that conduction velocity, which is going to be higher in the fast twitch muscles, then that onset is obviously going to be sooner. Now, if you remember that the peak impact happened within less than 50 milliseconds, right? So you get your first spike of impact forces when you're walking, when you're running, within less than 50 milliseconds. If it takes a fast twitch muscle sometimes up to 73 milliseconds to reach its peak conduction velocity or its peak action, then that means that you cannot react to impact forces. You must be contracting before the foot even contacts the ground. This theory is called the pre-activation response, which is again what I talk a lot about in my workshops, is we need to get our athletes and our clients and our patients to anticipate the impact forces through that pre-activation response. That is the only way that you're going to respond and damp these impact forces quickly. Pre-activation responses are also known as feed-forward responses, which are stored in the cerebellum. And the thing about feed-forward responses is that you want them to be accurate. And a lot of the barefoot training, if you've taken one of my workshops, is I focus a lot on barefoot movement prep, barefoot foot to core sequencing patterns as a way to train and prepare proper muscle activation patterns so that those will be stored in the cerebellum. If you store inaccurate information, it's not going to do you any good as far as injury risk or performance. So your feed-forward responses, we want them to be accurate. The most accurate that they're going to be is if you get all of that information to come in through the bottom of the foot, which means we have to take off the shoes and we have to take off the socks. So going a little bit more along this pre-activation response and the way that it relates to injury risk is after just 3 or 4 steps, your body has already pre-programmed the motor activation response or the muscle activation response to damp those vibrations that are coming in. So if you're walking around the floor and you have your barefoot exposed, after just a couple steps, your nervous system already knows the amount and the degree of those vibrations coming in. So you will start to tap into this pre-activation feed-forward response, and you will now be one step ahead of those impact forces. This is where a lot of injuries can be prevented. And I always give a great example. It was an example that Dr. Nigg gave in his textbook, and it had to do with Cirque du Soleil dancers or performers. And if you've heard this example, I'm sorry, but it's, I think, a very great example that really hits home the point, is Cirque du Soleil performers are obviously used to high impact forces, but they're very precise and they're very efficient, which means that they have a very low injury rate. So LA-based Cirque du Soleil, they got a brand new stage. Stage happened to have these beams throughout it. So it wasn't one straight compliancy throughout the entire stage. There would be surface and then a beam underneath and then surface and then a beam. Well, a lot of the performers started getting injured. They started getting these Achilles tendinitises, these plantar fasciitis, shin splints, etc. And they were like, this is weird. We don't get injured. We are trained very well. So they call Dr. Nig. Dr. Nig goes there. He looks at the stage and he sees that there's this variance in compliancy in that stage because of those beams. So if you base it on this pre-activation theory and the way that our body actually anticipates vibrations that are coming in, is that these dancers' nervous system was anticipating a certain degree of vibration, and if they happen to land over that beam, it's not going to match the actual vibrations coming in. If you don't match your perception or your anticipation with what's truly coming in, that's where you're going to get injured. So what they did is they changed the stage. They made it one compliancy. They took away all the beams and just made sure that there was a certain vibration throughout the entire surface. All of the performers' injuries went away, which I think is fascinating. There are many examples with this. I have patients who are runners and they'll switch from outdoor running to an indoor track, and they can relate their Achilles tendonitis kicking on when they switched. You have to allow an adaptation period for your body to start to train and start to anticipate that difference in impact forces or vibrations coming in. One last example related to this is when I was in Australia, the attendees there instantly picked up on this concept, and they told me that there was a Australian football league that they had their soccer field or their football field, and they had moved it. They built a brand new football field, but they put a parking garage below it. So parking garage, cement, so we know that there's a lot of concrete, and then they poured tons of dirt and then put the astroturf or whatever they were on, and they switched to this new field and they started getting injured. And the athletes were like, there's something different, like this field is not the same as the previous field. What's amazing is that they weren't even aware that it was their nervous system responding to this difference in vibrations. That's how sensitive our nervous system is. So what they did is they brought this device that could detect the differences in the vibrations. Sure enough, and the people who detected it were like, there's no way that you guys can note the difference between that surface and this surface, but they did, which I think is quite amazing. So fatigue and overuse injury risk. So what happens with fatigue is that we actually get a shift in our pH. Our muscles contract in a very specific pH range. As we increase our fatigue, which we know is going to be this lactic acid, and you drop that pH, what happens is you start to slow the conduction velocity and the time to peak muscle activation. Remember that impact force peak happens at less than 50 milliseconds. So if you have any delay in these muscles reaching their peak activation, what's going to happen is that these impact forces and vibrations go into the tendons and they go into the bones, which means Achilles tendonitis, plantar fasciitis, as well as shin splints and stress fractures. So we typically can associate that fatigue, and we know in ourselves that, if you push a little bit too hard, you fatigue. This is the science behind it, is that pH switches that, and we need to get that fast damping response so that we do not get this transfer of vibrations into the tendons and the bones. So want to address that. So how does your body use impact forces? Your body needs the impact forces. Most of what we do, especially walking is a series of essentially falling. You're falling due to gravity. And then when you go back from a push-off phase into mid-swing, so if you're imagining somebody walking and they're about to push off that back leg, from that back leg, until it's in line with your torso. That whole initial swing is all elastic recoil, which means that it's not muscles contracting. It's a very efficient way to move. Your body does not like to use energy. So if you're bringing in those impact forces, you're using it, you're storing it as potential energy, you're storing it in the connective tissue that actually has elastic components to it, which means that once you reach that peak elastic potential, which is going to be maximum ankle dorsiflexion at late mid stance, bam, it can recoil like a rubber band. That's the way that we want to use impact forces. If you think of someone like a dancer, or even like a child that's moving effortlessly, they're moving that way because they're actually using the impact that's coming in. Their nervous system is loading and storing and has this very young and naive response to the impact forces, and hasn't been damped and blocked by footwear and injury, etc., through all the years that happen in adulthood. That load and unload is called the catapult effect. And if you've never read about the catapult effect, it's very fascinating. A lot of that concept of catapult effect is actually related to research that was done in kangaroos. So a lot of research in studying how is that kangaroo jumping like 30 feet with these tiny little feet, and the way that their body is set up, how are they able to jump as far as 30 feet with each jump, which is quite impressive. What they're doing is they're efficiently loading and unloading the impact forces that are coming in from the previous jump or the previous land. So if we look at the bottom ground reaction force curve here, if you've ever seen these, I've seen a lot of these impact force curves described wrong on the internet and in presentations. So you really want to understand this. And as far as understanding the catapult effect, this graph is a great way to grasp that concept. So obviously at time 0, right? We're going to start at time 0. That's going to be your heel strike, or right before heel strike. And then we know that within that first 50 milliseconds, we can see, right? So this is our time here on the bottom. So within less than 50 milliseconds, we are at our impact peak. That impact peak is 1 to 1.5 times your body weight in impact forces, right? So if we're over here, it's 1 to 1.5 times your body weight in impact forces. That is at heel contact. What's happening at this little divot or drop here is that is your loading response. So your loading response drops. You're storing it now in your connective tissue. And then as you start to come forward and you rise to the top of this peak, here you can see that your impact forces actually increase. This here is the point of gait known as propulsion. So right here in this active peak, you are on your forefoot. So your peak pressure is now on your forefoot. Your heel is off of the ground, and you are somehow able to turn. What's fascinating, you're able to turn 1.5 times your body weight in impact forces into 2.5 times your body weight in impact forces. That is the catapult effect. The fact that you have a higher active peak means that you are actually using those impact forces that are coming in. Now, what happens when you are not using the catapult effect, which I see a lot, is that when I look at that patient's force peak curve or pressure curve, is that they have an impact peak that it'll sit here, and then their active peak will actually sit here. So it looks like two little hills that are equal height versus impact peak 1, active peak higher. That is evident, and that is proof that your client or your patient or your athlete is using that elastic tissue for this catapult effect and are moving efficiently. If it's equal heights, you know that they're not moving efficiently, which means we need to train them to tap into the way that the body actually loads and unloads. Again, I had mentioned that the way that we store our potential energy and our catapult effect, it lies within the Achilles tendon. And this Achilles tendon is similar to the kangaroo tendon of how they're able to jump 30 feet. Our Achilles tendon, when it's peak loaded, holds between 6 to 8 times your body weight in forces, which is amazing. And that's why it has to be trained the right way. It has to be trained to be able to withhold that degree of forces. And a lot of people, I think, are scared to stress their Achilles tendon, especially when they have a mild Achilles tendonitis, and they're so apprehensive. But that's the only way that you're going to get that recoil back into that tissue. Eccentric training, even though we load through isometrics, eccentrics is probably the best way to train elastic recoil in your Achilles tendon. And there's a lot of research behind Achilles tendinopathy and eccentric training for treating it. The latest research that I've read and that I've started to implement with my patients is that the eccentric training for Achilles tendonitis has to be done every single day, which means these patients or these clients or these athletes have to have that homework and they have to do it. A lot of the success or lack of success in eccentric training for Achilles tendonitis, I think it's because they're not doing it enough. If they do it once a week with the physical therapist, they're obviously not going to get that benefit, because every step we take is supposed to have that catapult effect. If we don't train that catapult effect, we're obviously going to start micro tearing it. And the micro tears of connective tissue down here on the bottom, I show that it's not even replaced with the right type of collagen, which makes it even harder to address these Achilles tendonitis. So your best bet is to avoid any micro tearing in the beginning by keeping that connective tissue like a rubber band. If you happen to get the micro tears and you get this type 1 collagen replaced with type 3 collagen, which does not have elastic recoil to it, then you have to get onto your eccentrics. The eccentrics is what's going to bring that rubber band effect back to that connective tissue. So very important. So what do we do with vibrations in today's society? And this is something that I see a lot, and I feel lucky in a sense to see it, being in New York and having an office down on Wall Street. As I get all the busy Wall Streeters, financiers, who all come in with their expensive Ferragamos and whatever, and they all have stress fractures. And the reason that they have stress fractures is because that's how disconnected their body is to the vibrations that are coming in. And the fact that they're walking on concrete, and I get asked this a lot about different surfaces, is that concrete does not vibrate. So your body needs the vibrations to come in. The vibrations that are coming from the concrete is not matching what your body is anticipating. So you have this mismatch. That mismatch is going to throw off your soft tissue compartments, which starts to stress your bones. So something that you can try is, and I've spoken about this before, is, have you ever walked down the street? You're doing a lot of walking. Say you're walking down some sort of like urban sidewalk, and you're in like little ballet flats, or you're in your Vibrams or something minimal, and you start to feel your Achilles tendon. So you know that you're getting a lot of repetitive impact that's coming in, and for whatever reason, because of the footwear or fatigue, you're not stiffening your connective tissue and your ankle and your foot and your compartments fast enough. So if you dorsiflex your big toe when you're walking, and you really accentuate dorsiflexion of your big toe, what you do is you're actually increasing the stiffness of your posterior chain at heel contact. And what's going to happen is you'll notice an immediate decrease in the impact forces coming in and your pain that you're feeling in your Achilles tendon. So I teach this to a lot of my patients who have plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis, which is related to footwear and lack of stiffness in their tissue, is at heel contact, you should be dorsiflexing your big toe because you need that stiffness. That stiffness allows you to bring in those vibrations versus everything being like a wet noodle in a sense. You need that stiffness. So the vibrations are not good. I'm not a big proponent of anybody running on concrete or the sidewalks because it doesn't work with the vibrations that your body is anticipating. Footwear blocks the way that you're anticipating these vibrations. Again, which relates to the concrete, is read some fascinating research about buildings and the flooring that they will put into apartment buildings. And obviously, you don't want to hear your neighbor walking upstairs. I'm sure we've all had that neighbor who's a heavy walker and you hear them walking around. So the building, they actually do research in what is the density of the material that I have to use so that no vibrations get transmitted through this surface that the person's walking on. That's good from like a building perspective. That's not good from a movement efficiency perspective. Is we want those vibrations. If we're walking around on the concrete that's not vibrating, that's not good from efficiency. So something to kind of think about is understand where vibrations are good, why they're not good, why some professions might see the vibrations as negative, etc. So very fascinating. So how do we improve our relationship with impact forces? Something huge that I work with all of my patients on is I try to change their relationship with impact forces so that they do not get injured, so they don't get a stress fracture just walking to work. First, obviously, you got to do some barefoot training. You have to keep the mechanoceptors on the bottom of the foot young, sensitive, dense, because they're the ones that detect the vibrations that are coming in. The more sensitive that the bottom of your foot is, the more accurate the perception of the vibrations you will get. The more accurate your perception is, the more accurate your muscle responses will be, and then that's what you're storing in your cerebellum. So your pre-activation responses will be more accurate if you have that accurate information coming in from the barefoot. Another thing that's great is that when you do barefoot training is you strengthen your intrinsic muscles. We have 18 muscles in the bottom of the foot, and they play a very important role in the way that you absorb impact forces. The way that you prevent stress fractures in your tibia and shin splints of your tibia is that the muscles of your lower leg, the compartments of your lower leg, when they contract isometrically, your whole lower leg stiffens up and it acts almost like a splint or a cast when you strike the ground. That same thing is supposed to be happening with the compartments in your foot. You have 9 compartments in your foot that need to contract to stiffen the foot itself as it's encountering those impact forces. If your intrinsics are weak, you're not going to be able to stiffen those compartments and you're not going to be able to brace those metatarsals. Guess what? You get a metatarsal stress fracture. That's why they are so prevalent. And every time I see a stress fracture, I see probably several stress fractures a week, which is unnecessary because people need to strengthen the foot and they need to strengthen those muscles that actually act as a splint to brace those impact forces. So very, very important. Second way that we can improve the way that our body responds to impact forces is obviously keeping your fascial connective tissue healthy. Whether you're doing foam rolling, myofascial work, trigger point release, dry needling, doesn't matter what you're doing to keep that connective tissue healthy and viscous, but you also want to train for fascial flexibility. So whether you're doing like a gyrotonics type movement, there's a method called controlology, which is kind of moving in that same thing. This picture here is showing it's a fascial training system where you're pre-tensing the fascial line and then you're recoiling into that fascial line. So I have some great research on that. And if you've taken any of my training, it's on the back end in the EBFA portal is a lot of articles and research on maintaining that fascial flexibility through movements such as this. So just remember that that recoil of elastic transfer lies within your fascia and your tendons. The more cross links or micro tearing and changing in collagen type that happens, and it happens obviously more as we age, the less efficient we're going to start moving. And then we're obviously going to start getting hurt. Another way that you can get back in touch with those vibrations is through smarter footwear. Obviously, we live in a shod society, so we need to wear shoes. Going for more minimal versus maximal or traditional cushioning is very important. The more cushion you have in shoes, the more it skews your perception of these vibrations, and you want an accurate perception. The more cushion you have in shoes and the more support and orthotics, etc., your intrinsics actually get lazy. They've shown EMG studies that your intrinsics fire less, but I just told you how the intrinsics have to act as a splint to brace and increase that compartment pressure so that when you strike the ground, you have that support of those metatarsals. So having something more minimal is obviously very important. So being smart about that. Another thing is allowing surface adaptation. So if you're going from an outdoor surface to an indoor track, allow that adaptation period. So almost allow some sort of periodization or increase in the mileage. Do some movement prep on that surface barefoot before you start running or start training on it. When I work with basketball players, I want them to do all their barefoot work on the court, not somewhere else, because that's not the impact forces they're going to encounter. So trying to think about that almost as if how at the Olympics, right? Before they have an Olympics, everybody flies in and they train in that facility for a certain amount of period before the actual Olympics happen. That's them allowing that adaptation period. We want to think of that same thing even for our weekend warriors, is they need to allow that adaptation period. The more you vary the surfaces, the more you throw off your anticipation response to the vibrations. So think of the stage, that Cirque du Soleil stage, and how it had beams. If you have a training facility, if you're a health club owner and your surface has a different compliancy, say your Group X room has, I don't know, for whatever reason, a certain compliancy because it's not kept up to date, people will get injured because of that shift in vibrations that they're encountering. So something to think about as well. And I think an area that is totally fascinating. Last area that you can use to kind of improve someone's perception of vibrations or their relationship with vibrations is through technology or through these other modalities. Here I'm showing the compression garments. The way that the lower leg compression garments work is that it takes some of the burden of the vibration dampening that your soft tissue compartments have to do. So if your soft tissue compartments don't have to work as hard, obviously you would fatigue less. So you would be able to keep your peak muscle activation time faster or higher if you use a compression garment like this, so you won't get that shift in conduction velocity and then a delay and then a transfer into the bone. So anyone who has shin splints, these are used a lot. They're used as a recovery modality, but they're also very much used for allowing a better relationship with the vibrations. So something to think about. Last thing I'm going to talk about is this is an in-shoe device, and there's a lot of these now. We use them for assessing. I use them in the office all the time as far as measuring peak pressure. Is you actually can now control, and this one is specific for a diabetic who are very sensitive to pressure and impact, and if they encounter a certain amount of pressure and impact over time, their tissue breaks down. So this is actually a ulcer preventive modality. But if we, and this doesn't exist yet for the layperson, but it will soon, is soon we will be able to detect the amount of vibrations that we're encountering, and like a little alarm will go off when your insole or your device senses that you've reached your peak pressure and vibrations. I hope that's making sense, because that's what this is doing right now as far as diabetics. Is it saying like, okay, Johnny, you've been walking a little too much here. Like, you're going to break down underneath your first metatarsal head and get a bad ulcer if you don't back off and let that soft tissue repair itself and that skin, and just kind of let's get some circulation back to the area, then start walking again. Think kind of in that same lines, is that this would be able to say, like, listen, okay, you've been walking, pretty far. You're encountering a lot of vibrations coming in, in your Ferragamos. If you keep pushing it, you're going to get a fourth metatarsal fracture. So in that same way, soon we're going to have that technology. So there's a couple ways as far as how we can improve our perception of vibrations. Remember the impact of the footwear. Remember that this theory of cushion absorbing impact forces is totally wrong. And really what it is everything is vibrations. Your body needs to be accurately perceiving the vibrations coming in. And if you're on a certain surface that doesn't vibrate in a natural way, such as concrete or cement or other training surfaces, it's going to fight with your body. If there's any variance in vibrations, what your body anticipates might not match what's coming in, and then you will get hurt. We need tissue and compartment stiffness on contact, and if it's not stiff enough, it's going to go into the tendons and into the bones, and that's where a lot of this Achilles tendonitis and shin splints and stress fractures come from. So taking that advice, kind of exploring it a little bit, and start looking at some of your clients or your patients or even your athletes of how they move, how the relationship is, and maybe a way that you could shift their recovery programming or their performance programming to take in account this information. If you guys have any questions, please type those in. As you're thinking of your questions, I will talk about the Barefoot Training Summit, which is coming up in 2015. We have March, which is going to be in India. So if anyone wants to go to India from the US, or if you are in Southeast Asia, Australia, Europe, quick little flight to India. It's going to be an amazing summit, 3 days. We have parkour, animal flow, Dr. Perry of Stop Chasing Pain, Kevin Seymour of Hong Kong, Stacey Lee Krause of Willpower and Grace, David Martinez of Spain, Zebra. He works with Exos. So a lot of amazing presenters. For Denver, we have an awesome lineup as well. Animal Flows there again. We have Dr. Mark Martino of Georgia College, Cody Stipe of Functional Aging Institute, Lauren Lando, who works with some of the top UFC fighters, myself. So it's a very exciting event. Please visit barefoottrainingsummit.com. And then, of course, our workshops for 2015 are already lined up, both with myself and with some of our master instructors. So please check that out. They are all over the world. They are in 8 different languages. So there's no reason why you should not be able to attend. So going to our questions, again, type them in if you have any questions. If you think of any questions and you don't have time for it, please email me. If you want the PDF of this and you have to sign off because of time conflicts, please email me, education@EBFA Fitness. Otherwise, we're going into our questions. So if concrete does not vibrate, do you recommend avoiding training on concrete? Yes, from a, let's say like a running perspective, is let's say if you have to train on concrete, I don't know for in what reason, is try to use footwear that does not block or damp your perception of the vibrations that may be coming in. Also allow enough tissue recovery. So if you do train on concrete, what I would say is space out the workouts on the concrete a little bit further apart, knowing that you're going to stress the tissue more, and allow it adequate recovery. So I would say if you have to train on concrete, don't do it more than or sooner than 48 hours in between. And that typically is my number that I give patients for allowing adequate soft tissue recovery, is that 48 hours is what I would say. I do know that some tracks, I used to run track in North Dakota, and probably the poorest city, a town of 300, that they just like poured concrete and made like a track. Um, Obviously, everybody was getting injured from that. Where if we understood these principles, one, we probably wouldn't have run on it, or two, you would have included a little bit different recovery techniques into that. That's what I would say for it. But if you can avoid the concrete, avoid it at all cost. So, can impact forces affect your hamstrings? Can it be in factor of a hamstring pull? So obviously everything is going to continue up through the compartments, but a lot of the damping that's happening occurs knee down. You want it to be knee down. And yes, you do get some of that storage of elastic potential more proximally, especially in the glutes and in the quads. More of a hamstring pull, you can get a whole Achilles tendon all the way up into the proximal hamstring insertion. So it's kind of like a whole posterior chain issue. I would not relate that to impact forces. I relate that more to more of a movement compensation. So I hope that helps. It's a little bit different than the Achilles tendon, because the Achilles tendon is really where your body is storing that catapult effect and that peak potential energy, which is different than the hamstring. What kind of floor do you think would best benefit a dance floor surface? So a lot of the gyms, I don't know if any health club owners are listening, but the wood has the best vibration. But what you can do is you can test the different surfaces. I always go for wood. Wood is going to have the best vibration, but you can test it and try to match it at that 15 to 20 hertz. So you want something that's going to conduct vibration. So any sort of flooring under it, if you have concrete too close to that wood, you're going to get almost like that football field effect that I told you. So you don't want to have wood sitting directly on a concrete slab. You want to have something that's going to allow that vibration to travel and to bounce back to that individual or to that dancer. I hope that answers your question. Thoughts on NKT pre-programming for creating better patterns? I have not taken NKT, so I cannot answer that in an educated way, or in somebody who's actually taken the program. I am sure that you can come up with some pre-programming, knowing that our goal, or your primary goal with vibrations and impact forces in the way that we respond, is wake up your intrinsics in your foot, wake up your lower extremity soft tissue compartments so that they are working. And then you have to get your foot and your core to work together and to sync faster so that you're stabilizing in that single leg stance. So because I do not do NKT, I use my own method of foot to core sequencing and barefoot activation. A lot of it has to do with getting short foot and the foot intrinsics to work with the pelvic floor and the deep hip stabilizers like a reflex. That is how I prep athletes and patients for movement, is doing 5 to 8 minutes of this foot to core sequencing and the barefoot stimulation. And then that's priming their system for these impact forces. If you can kind of parallel something to that through NKT, then that would be my recommendations for that. So hopefully that helped. When you say natural surfaces, what does that mean? Natural means more like dirt and not like a linoleum or a concrete or a marble. Things that don't vibrate. You want to have, that dirt in the wood, something that has a little bit of a recoil to it, knowing that the earth, the surface, has a vibration to it. It's the vibrations that tells your nervous system if something is soft or hard. If you were walking across let's say like carpet, say you're walking and then you're on your, as I'm looking at my living room, maybe you're walking across the wood floor and then you step onto the carpet, you know that it's the carpet, which has a different surface compliancy to it because the vibrations has shifted that your nervous system is now encountering. Remember that 80% of your mechanoceptors on the bottom of the foot are sensitive to vibration. So yes, there's a difference in texture. Yes, it'll shift skin stretch a little bit, but it's really the vibrations that we're trying to get. So if you can do all your training outside on grass or on some sort of dirt surface, that would probably be ideal. I use box jumps to train my basketball players. Should they go barefoot? I have them go barefoot when they train on the agility ladder. What about football players? Should I go onto a grass surface and train them barefoot? Yes, you can 100% do box jumps, both landing on and off the box barefoot. You just have to prep them the right way. And I did a little video that's on the YouTube channel on barefoot landing techniques. And I would do some sort of foot to core priming before you just land and start doing these barefoot box jumps, because what's going to happen is they're not going to get the reflex foot activation that they need, and they will probably get some sort of tendonitis, plantar fasciitis from it. And we obviously don't want that. So if it's done in a progressive way, you absolutely 100% can do it. And then after you do the box jumps barefoot, put the shoes on and do them again in their shoes. So you want to get the different environments, do it barefoot, do it in their shoes, and transfer that variance to these different environments. How do bunions impact this stiffening? And when do you say running isn't for you? So the bunions, these are very good questions, by the way, which are whole other webinars in themselves. The bunions, what I would tell you if you want to learn a little bit more about the bunions is I've written several blogs about bunions. I go into the x-rays of bunions and I show how different types or degrees of bunions impact first MPJ range of motion, which without going too into detail, because then this will become a whole certification here, is if the bunion is to the severity that it impacts your first MPJ dorsiflexion, what is going to happen is that you enter swing phase too early because you're not able to go into full terminal stance or full propulsion. If you pick up your foot too early, you've shifted the timing of your elastic recoil, so your efficiency is going to go down. If you skew that timing, then that foot that entered swing too early is going to then strike the ground a little bit faster than what it's anticipating, because you're kind of like one step ahead of every movement because you're not going through each phase to its fullest potential, if that makes sense. When I teach gait workshops, and I do this in both my movement from the ground up and foot strike courses, it's understanding not just late mid stance, what's the goal, propulsion, what's the goal, but more what is the impact on efficiency and the way that our connective tissue responds if you bypass any of these steps. If you don't get full late mid stance, which is when your foot is all the way back and your heel is still on the ground, right? That's called late mid stance. That's when you get your greatest stretch of your Achilles tendon. That's when you're getting your greatest peak potential energy. And it's almost like you're taking the rubber band and you're stretching it all the way. And then as soon as you pick up that heel, it's going to kick in and respond. That's you using your connective tissue the way that you're supposed to. If you pick up the foot quicker before it gets that peak stretch, now you're using your calf muscles instead of them being isometric, now you're making them actually like contract concentrically, and you're going to start to get strains in these muscle bellies. So that's another way that it can impact efficiency and injury risk, I guess. So one is running not for you. I would say if they don't have 30 degrees of first MPJ dorsiflexion, that's when I would do that. And then Carl just asked me, Carl just asked me if the Denver Summit dates changed. And Carl, yes, they did. It's 15th to the 17th due to Mother's Day. So just FYI on that. So as far as regarding the compression garments, we're almost done with the questions. We'll do just a couple more. Regarding the compression garments, do you recommend people use a sock or a calf sleeve, and why? Ooh, very good question. Very, very good question. So do not use compression socks. You do not want to compress the whole foot. You want to use the recovery compression sleeves that are very specific to runners. And everything is going to be at a little bit different. Compression garments are measured by millimeters mercury. And if it's too restrictive, you're going to restrict the natural vasodilation that needs to happen as kind of like the pump or the hypertrophy of the muscle when you're using it. You're going to restrict that. So you don't want too high of a millimeters per mercury compression grade. I would do a true runner's compression sleeve, which you can get at running shoe stores, online, etc. The full compression socks where you're actually compressing the foot as well. I find that a little bit excessive in the sense that it really constricts the digits, and it might impair some of the ankle mobility depending on how tight you do. I would do ankle to knee. That's typically how I recommend it, versus the whole foot. So hopefully that helps. Okay, what should a soccer team do to overcome the change from training on grass to playing on a game of artificial surface? If you're meaning like an astrotype surface, a lot of those have, like, they're put on dirt. What I would find out with these soccer fields is see if there is any concrete that's under it, almost like this soccer field in Australia that I was talking about. Any facility that's going to be built over a parking garage or something like that, you would want to take into account. And if your athletes are training or competing on something like that, is maybe do some extra prep work, maybe do some extra barefoot work, and really, really focus on the recovery. So if they're doing it, maybe do an extra recovery day for their connective tissue, knowing that it's going to take increased stress if they are on a field that has that concrete to some degree on it. If it's the AstroTurf that's on like dirt, and there's no concrete under it, it technically should vibrate in the same way that the grass one or the one without the AstroTurf. But something to think about, and I think that's a very good question. Can you go into training the Achilles for better recoil, eccentrics? Yes. You want to, when you're doing the eccentrics for the Achilles tendon, the best way, or two of the best ways, is walking backwards on a treadmill. I use that for probably everyone, even if they don't have Achilles tendonitis, is walking backwards on a treadmill. And you want to do the negative heel lift. So if you're on like a step and you pick up one foot and you're doing the eccentric or the negative heel raise, so you're dropping your heel down, do 1 foot at a time. Don't do 2 foot. Do 1 foot at a time. You want to get a maximum stretch to that Achilles tendon, and then use the opposite foot to push you up. So you're going up with the good, if they have Achilles tendonitis, go on a single leg, lower down with the other foot. Push up with the good leg, other leg, down, 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 down. And you want to do it that way. You want to actually load them up. So if they're holding some sort of dumbbell, they have a weighted vest, you actually want to load up that tissue as well. So the success of eccentrics is the duration, the intensity or the load that you're putting on it, and the stretch of that connective tissue. That's the most important thing with it. Remember that you want to do the eccentrics every single day. You want to do with the knee straight and the knee bent so that you hit the soleus and you hit the gastroc, even though that we know that more of your Achilles tendon is actually soleus. So if you also feel like you're not getting a lot of success with your Achilles tendon eccentric training and you really haven't focused that much on with the knee bent, know that up to 2/3, 50% to 2/3 of your Achilles tendon is soleus. So I would focus much more on the knee bent eccentrics. And you want to do approximately 15 reps, 3 sets is what the research is now showing. So, yes, so let's see if there's any, I'm sorry, there's just so many questions. You guys have wonderful questions. What about hockey ice surface over a parking garage? That's a very good last question that we're going to end on is ice surface over parking garage. I will tell you that this is one area, the ice, that I don't know too much on. But I will get back to you. So Tom, I will get back to you on that. As far as vibrations that are coming in, how many vibrations does a skater encounter? Because I know the foot patterning is different than running or jumping. So I will look into that and then I will get back to you. I will probably write a blog on that. So it is now 9:00 Eastern Standard Time. So we've had a great hour. Thank you, everybody who has tuned in. Happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year as we go into 2015. Please check out EBFA's courses as we go into 2015. We are all over the world. We have wonderful master instructors all over the world. We are in 8 different languages. So translation is not an issue. And Barefoot Training Summit, please check that out. We have amazing presenters on the lineup. I have a book that's coming out February 2015 called Barefoot Strong. So please check that out as well. That is designed for the professional, but also for our patients and our clients. So that's exactly what I'm talking about here, so that they can really actually understand their body and the way that their body uses impact forces so that they can take their health into their own hands. And then EBFA is working on a product. It'll be our first product. And it is, of course, all about barefoot stimulation. So it is a surface for barefoot training. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. And I hope to see you on our next webinar. Be well.